Welcome to the Shoreview Community Speakers Series. Prior to beginning, I just want to mention that we are again this year doing the Green Community Awards, and it's open for applications. Mark Rader is our guest speaker this evening. Mark is an ISA board-certified master arborist with 22 years of forestry consulting experience. He's a Minnesota Department of Agriculture certified tree inspector. He is the contracted forester for the city of North Oaks. He manages numerous city shade tree disease programs and other critical municipal functions, such as working on tree ordinances, approving landscape plans, tree preservation at both the developer and builder level, providing homeowner advice. That's what I'm here for. Mark recently added the International Society of Arboriculture Tree Risk Assessment qualification to his resume. He is a project manager for SNS Tree Specialists. Welcome, please welcome Mark.
Thank you, Kathy. Thank you very much, Kathy. Great turnout tonight. Thank you very much to everyone for showing up tonight. Hopefully give you a good presentation here about some common insect and disease issues in Shoreview, as well as some not so common ones. And then also wanted to talk to you about pruning a little bit. When you meet with a tree care advisor or a tree care company, they tell you what they're going to do, but I want to kind of talk about that terminology so that maybe you can understand that, and when you talk to them next time, you can identify with what they're saying a little bit better. And then lastly, I've just got 10 good trees. You know, if you're thinking about planting this summer or spring, some good trees that might do well in your property. They're tough, you know, generally native, and, you know, pretty insect and disease free. So that's what I plan on speaking about tonight. So thank you very much for that. So on the agenda, Japanese beetle, very common problem here. Apple scab is also another disease issue that we have. Oak wilt, also still fairly common in Shoreview. The emerald ash borer, have some updates on that as well. Bur oak blight, which is something that we're seeing a little bit more of in the area. And then, as I mentioned, the pruning and the top 10 trees. So without further ado, I will jump right into it. Now, this is a common sight maybe that many have seen either in private properties or on boulevard trees. This is just a little leaf linden, also known as a basswood, a great tree, very common around here. But as you can see, there's a lot of damage on the top of that tree. And that's essentially the feeding from that introduced beetle, the Japanese beetle. Here's a little bit of a close-up of a birch leaf. It's also one of its preferred hosts. You can see the beetles right on there, just chewing up that leaf. Obviously going to be difficult for that tree. It loses a lot of its photosynthetic ability and is going to be struggling a little bit as a result of that. Here's a little bit of a close-up of that Japanese beetle. It is an introduced beetle. It was around the 1900s where it was introduced from Japan, obviously. And some of its favorite hosts are the linden tree, which we saw in the first one, birch trees as well. Roses obviously are affected quite a bit by it. Grapevines and grapes, and also Norway maples seem to be a favorite of this beetle. As you can see, they feed on the upper side of that leaf, so a lot of times they are really visible when they're out feeding, and they do not eat the veins. They just kind of eat that leaf surface. And what they do is kind of skeletonize, like we saw in that previous photo, skeletonizing that birch leaf. And they do most of this damage, during the summer months. They do like, a lot of heat. They do like high temperatures, and they do like high humidity. So that's when we'll see most of their activity. Here's a close-up of an adult Japanese beetle. We see some identifying features on it. It's got those 5 lateral tufts that you can see right along the side. And then it also has 2 white tufts in the back. So if you see them feeding on your tree, this may help you make that diagnosis that this is what you're seeing. Some people, will remove these by hand actually, because the numbers can get so high. You can actually kind of get a glove and just scrape them off the tree where you can reach them and just put them in soapy water, and they will perish that way. But it's almost something that you have to do on a daily basis in order for it to be effective. So definitely keep that in mind. I want to talk a little bit about the life cycle of the insect so that you can understand how to manage it and how to treat it. It definitely has a lot of different life stages. A dormant grub where it's deep in the ground during the winter months, and then as it warms up, it gets near the surface. It does start to feed on turf roots quite a bit at that point, so golf courses have a real big problem with this insect. It does also go through a pupal stage, and then it will turn into an adult. That's when it leaves the ground, does its feeding, and then goes back to the ground again where it will lay its eggs. So you can see, on that photo there, a lot of times you'll see brown spots in your lawn, and you'll wonder what that is. And it may be a sign that you have some Japanese beetle issues. If you pull back that area and you see a lot of grubs like this, that could again indicate that you may have a Japanese beetle infestation. And that's, when it makes sense to start to treat. Here's kind of the life cycle again. In these winter months, they're going to be low in the ground. Come April or May, they do come up and start to feed on those roots. Then we get into June and July, the real hot months. There you can see the adults now feeding on the leaves of those specific hosts that we mentioned. They'll also lay their eggs during the night, and then they'll go back up and feed during the day. And then the grubs will hatch. The eggs will hatch, turn into grubs, and then they go down in the winter months. So if you're looking to control them, it's best not to put a lot of chemicals on your tree or to try to fight them when they're in the adult stage. They do have wings. They can fly, many, many miles if they have to. The best time to try to get them, if you have a heavy infestation, like we showed, if you pull back the sod and you see a lot of them, the best time to get them is right in that late July, early August time frame. The grubs are obviously going to be thin-skinned, very sensitive to any chemical that you will put on them. So the timing is really critical. I can't encourage that enough. If you feel the need to apply pesticides or anything like that, really make sure you read that label. Make sure you understand what you're getting yourself into, because that's one thing we want to try to limit. But it's a really effective tool if you time it right and you read the label and you certainly do it right. So, and again, make sure the infestation justifies the treatment. I always try to encourage people to use a professional when you're doing this. And that's just not just so that, we or they make money. It's obviously, it helps the environment too, and you're going to get better results. There are do-it-yourselfers out there. I completely understand that. So there are some of those tools that are available to you. But definitely, read the labels, use them appropriately. And if you don't want to mess with that, ask a professional. So these are some of the common names and trade names of some of these insecticides that you can use for that purpose. I want to move on to apple scab, which again is also another fungal issue that we see quite a bit of. These are the hosts that you will see it on. Apple trees, crab apples are obviously real common. Mountain ash, cotoneaster, as well as pear trees. Again, it's a fungal issue, and if you leave the leaves on the ground in the winter, if you get a lot of rain in the spring, the raindrops hit the leaves, they kick up these fungal spores into the air, they land on the blossoms of the trees, in the springtime, especially with the crab apples, and now you've got an infected blossom, an infected twig, and infected leaves just as they are emerging. So that's kind of the biology, that's kind of the process on how it starts. And what you'll see with the symptoms, you can see it a little bit there, but when it's not fully developed yet, you'll kind of see these olive green, these kind of drab spots on your leaves, not really well-defined margins. You can see it on the fruit in that smaller picture, maybe as necrotic spots or black spots. And if your apple tree or crab apple is very sensitive to it, you really can get a lot of premature leaf drop, lose all the leaves, come June, July, basically. And that's, again, very hard for that tree because it's not really able to make any energy at that point without its leaves. So a lot of different varieties of crab apples out there, and a lot of different variability, whether they're susceptible to it or they have some resistance to it. As far as management, good thing not to pack your trees really close together. Again, it's a fungal issue. You want air circulation. You want it to be dry. You want it to be sunny. Harder for that fungus, to get established in there. It's not a bad idea to pick up the leaves as they drop, or certainly before the winter months, because again, they are the inoculum for next season. They are what's going to be bringing it back. You may or may not see a lot of benefit from that, but it certainly cannot hurt. If you, again, are going to do a spray of any type, it's great to do it right as those leaves are emerging, because that's when they are vulnerable. So if you have a crab apple that you see this on a lot, you probably should be on someone's list by now, to be honest, because they are going to be out soon, and you want to do it every 2 weeks just as they're emerging to keep them protected. And it's simply a fungicide that you will put on there. And the more you do it, the longer your protection is going to be. And again, if you have a crab apple that you're tired of having to manage, again, there are a lot of good resistant varieties out there. University of Minnesota Extension is a great resource. They've got a lot of information on these diseases and a lot of suggestions as far as what are good ones to plant and how to control and manage them as well. Oak wilt is also something that we have a lot of here still in Shoreview. It also is a fungal issue. Red oaks, 80 years old, if they get the disease, will die in about 30 days. So it's extremely fatal to them. Unlike the other diseases, this one is fatal. This one will definitely kill a tree fairly quickly. Fortunately, that's a red oak in the picture there. You see it kind of wilting from the top down. It gets that copper kind of bronze color on the leaves, and you'll get that premature leaf drop as well, and kind of starts from the top and works its way down. Bur oaks do have a little bit more resistant to it, so it's not always so obvious with them what's going on, but they can also die, but it may take many years for that to happen. White oaks have the most resistance to the disease, and they can maybe even lose a branch, and that's it. So a lot of variability in there. And it's not something that's always necessarily so easy to diagnose. There are a lot of things that can look like oak wilt. So definitely, if you have someone out, make sure it's someone that you really believe in and trust in, just to be able to get a proper diagnosis. And this is also something that you can actually sample for. It's not always easy, but the Plant Health and Disease Clinic at the University of Minnesota St. Paul campus, if you can get a branch off there of something actively wilting, they will be happy to look at it. They'll try to culture out the fungus. They will try to tell you what's going on with your oak tree. So just keeping that in mind. A lot of different maladies that the oaks have, and not always so straightforward to diagnose. So when I go do an oak wilt consult and I see a dying tree and I see other dead trees nearby, I'm not going to look at the dying tree per se. I'm probably going to be better off looking at the dead trees that they maybe haven't removed yet, especially if it's in the red oak variety. They can give you some clues. If you see these cracks in the bark on a red oak, and the arrow's pointing right to it, but it still may not be that obvious to you. But if you see the cracks, you get a little hatchet and you pull back that bark right there, you may or may not see what is a spore mat. Only about 30% of the red oaks will produce these, but it's the reproductive stage of the fungus. It is a mushroom, essentially. It's very fleshy to the touch, and it only stays on the tree, for like 3 or 4 weeks, and it's usually right around this time here in the springtime. And you'll see that under the bark. And if you do see these spore mats, the only thing it can be at that point is oak wilt. So your diagnosis is essentially done at that point. So that's why sometimes I like to look at the dead trees versus the live trees. And I mentioned these spore mats because I wanted to talk a little bit about the life cycle of oak wilt. It's pretty interesting, So let's say if my cursor is pointing there to a dead tree that died of oak wilt, let's say last summer. This year, it's going to produce those spore mats if it's a type of tree that will do that. And that's just the previous slide that I showed there, those spore mats. When those spore mats produced, they are of interest to this little fella right here. Picnic beetle, I guess, is a common name for it. They like sweet stuff. They like sugars. They like starches. And this spore mat, it smells like rotten apples to me a little bit. It also has a very sweet smell to it. Juicy fruit gum, people have told me it smells like. But nevertheless, they do like to visit that, and they do like to feed on that. And what they do is they'll get the spores from that fungus, from that fungal pad, right on their body. And then what they do is they fly to a healthy tree, and this tree has either been wounded by a windstorm or someone pruning at the wrong time of the year, which is April, May, or June, essentially for the oaks. So definitely keep that in mind. Oaks only want to be pruned during the winter months. If there are any bugs around, I wouldn't prune your oaks, essentially, is a good rule of thumb. But anyways, they'll fly to a new tree that's been wounded. They will introduce that fungus into the vascular system. Due to their feeding, the tree's response to that fungus in its vascular system is to try to compartmentalize it, try to keep it from moving, because the fungus is competing with the tree for the same nutrients. And the tree will try to plug it up so it doesn't move, but the fungus can move faster than the tree can react, especially in the case of these red oaks. And the tree will cause itself to wilt just by the plugging of its vascular system. So that's what the wilting is coming from. So it's the tree's response to that fungus is what's actually killing the tree, unfortunately. So then you're back to your dead tree, essentially. So that explains, the overland spread of the disease, and that's the way an infection center will start for oak wilt. But then there's also the underground spread of the disease. This only accounts for about 10% of the oak wilt. This accounts for 90% of trees dying from oak wilt. So trees, as a defense mechanism against drought, kind of grafted their roots together. When they meet in the soil, if they're the same species, they'll graft together and they'll share whatever nutrients they have. In the case of this fungus, it's kind of backfired because it's given it an ability to move from tree to tree. It can go about 30 feet in a year or so, so you can definitely see a progression over time from this disease. And if it gets in there, you can stand to lose many trees over many years. So one of the tools that we use to treat for oak wilt is this machine. It's a big machine, obviously, and it's got that big, it's got a big 5-foot blade on the back. And that gets inserted into the ground, and it essentially will disrupt that root connection. Cut those roots so that the fungus cannot travel around. This is still probably the best tool that we have for oak wilt control. A lot of new research on herbicides and other technologies and techniques, but this is still tried and true, and that's usually what I abide by. I'm not one to try something new and say it works. So I still prefer this method for oak wilt, if the site allows. Another option, obviously, is the fungicide treatment. I think it's good for high-value trees. If you've got a big oak in your front yard that you really like and it's at risk, this is a great option. Here you see a couple bur oaks. We've excavated out that root flare. It's just a simple canister with a little bit of pressure on there. You pour the fungicide in there, you pour the water in there. The tree will suck it up just from turgor pressure alone. A lot of times you don't really even have to pump them. You'll see the chemical start to be pulled into the tree, so that's pretty neat. But it doesn't keep the fungus out of the tree. It's more of a fungistat. It will mask the symptoms. So the tree may still have it, but it's not going to die from it. And the trick is you do have to redo it. That as the tree grows, it kind of leaves the chemical behind, so you do have to re-inject your tree every 2 years to kind of keep it healthy and living. So definitely keep that in mind. But I think the oaks are worth it, in my opinion. I mean, I don't think there's really a better tree out there. So, all right. I maybe should have called this the Big Green Menace, right? I mean, it looks like right out of a sci-fi movie. To me, it's a really neat looking bug. But you can see it's really pretty small, actually. You see it on the penny there, small in size, but big in devastation, obviously. Now, I pulled this off the Department of Agriculture website. You can see we're Turtle Lake, essentially, North Oaks, Pleasant Lake. I think that's all the Armory, if I'm not mistaken, and Arden Hills. Shamrock Park is right in here. And these are all the dots where they have confirmed emerald ash borer. These dots don't represent single trees, but more neighborhoods, if you will. So that's many, many, many trees that are in there. But luckily, we're still in the quarantine. We're still in the generally infested area, but it hasn't quite ramped up to the point where you're noticing it like we are in Minneapolis and the St. Paul area. Again, this is just pulled off the Department of Ag website. Here we've got Minneapolis. Here we've got St. Paul, and this is kind of where, it started right on that border, and you can see just the sheer number of finds, and we're really starting to notice it down by the airport. Fort Snelling Park down there in that river bottom area. Even as you drive into the airport, there's a lot of ash trees right in the median there. I don't even know if they're still there, but those are all dying. Edina just had a find like 3 days ago, so they're part of it. I think St. Paul Park was just added. I think Newport is essentially in there. I was out with some inspectors from the Department of Ag just like 2 days ago here in Maplewood. And, we added about 25 more neighborhoods to the list. So, and you're really starting to notice it driving down streets. The trees are being impacted. What they're looking for when they're doing these inspections is actually woodpecker activity. That's the best clue. They're telling us what's going on underneath the bark. They can hear the chewing, and they key right into that. And if you see a lot of woodpecker activity, the trees are already pretty infested. Year one of the infestation for ash, you really won't see anything on the tree. Year two, you probably won't see anything. Year three, you'll start to see the woodpecker holes, and by that time, you probably will notice some dieback on the tree that year, but it's not going to die yet. Year four, you'll probably have a lot of woodpecker holes, and then year five, the tree will pretty much be done. So it takes a while for it to work through there, but nevertheless, it's still there, and it's still active. So if you're thinking about treating your trees, definitely give it serious consideration. If you wait too long and you see too many woodpecker holes, it's really not going to be worth it at that point. And there are some pretty good treatments out there. Trunk injections are definitely something I would encourage. And again, I would almost recommend a professional to do this for you. I know the city has a really good program too that you might definitely want to take advantage of. There are some do-it-yourselfers out there, but I'm not really too much of a fan of those. The best product so far seems to be the emamectin benzoate. It's great for larger trees. Lasts for 2 years. It's trunk injected, so it doesn't get poured on the ground. It won't leach out, anything like that. Doesn't hurt the pollinators. Ash trees are kind of wind pollinated, not bee pollinated, and they're just tiny little flowers, so that's not an issue there. And 99% efficacy. I mean, it really does work well. So if you've got high value ash, I would recommend that course of action. As long as the bugs are still in the area, it's something that you're going to want to continue to do. And every 2 years is this product. Most products are every year or even more often. So that's the other good thing about this, is it lasts a little bit longer. And again, be careful with the do-it-yourself products. They are out there. They say they work. But for larger trees, you're probably not going to get the protection that you would desire to get. So I think, when you're thinking about your own property and the ash trees on your property, what are you going to do? Take stock of what you have. Where are the ash trees? If you can't identify them, especially now without leaves, find someone who does, an arborist, and they'll be happy to walk the property with you, show you where they are. If you have some large ones in the front, landscape trees, definitely consider treating those. The benefits that you derive from those trees as far as, shade, heating and cooling costs, aesthetics, pretty to look at, wildlife, habitat, just dust. And, if you live on a busy street, they catch a lot of dust and a lot of pollutants. So it's definitely well worth the investment, and you'll get your return without a doubt. It's not that expensive to do. And make decisions based on those benefits. If you've got a tree that's, near the property line and is leaning towards your neighbor's, shed or something like that, and it's not in the greatest shape and you don't want to invest in it, at least get the tree out, so it's not going to be a hazard or a potential risk further on down the line. As it ramps up here, it's going to be harder to find people to remove those trees. The cost is going to go up. And a lot of times they may not be able to do it just because they become very brittle very quickly, and you don't want a climber climbing in those trees because they will break and snap. So if you're thinking about doing some preemptive removals, now would be the time for that as well. And again, that time to treat is closing. So if you're thinking about that as well, keep it on the radar. Changing tunes here a little bit. Nissa was here last session, and she did talk about the weather and climate change a little bit. This is one of her quotes. So the last 10 years, 10 warmest years have been in the last 30 years, essentially. There's really no doubting the data. We see a lot, moisture levels are definitely going up. Heat is also going up. Some of it may be naturally occurring, but it's going up more than it really ever has before. And if you do get a lot of heat and a lot of rain, it's also going to be a good environment, for tree problems. Hardiness zones, obviously, is something else that has also been changed. The one on the left is the 1990s. The one on the right is from 2015. What used to grow in southern Iowa is now going to do well in southern Minnesota. And that's kind of reflective of that heat and moisture index. So we definitely have changes going on, and these are going to impact our trees as well. And maybe that could be related to bur oak blight, which is again another fungal issue. It is specific to bur oaks. It was a problem in Iowa for many years. But it is a native fungus, unlike oak wilt, which is technically an invasive, unlike Japanese beetle, unlike emerald ash borer. These are all introduced. Bur oak blight is a native, but just because of the change, it's having more of an impact here. Again, it began in Iowa, but we're noticing a lot of it in Minnesota. And it's another reason could also be just the older oaks. The oaks not going to be here forever necessarily. We don't have a lot in the understory necessarily, so really appreciate them while you have them. But as they get older, they are not as resilient. They can't fight off the diseases as much as they used to in the past. So that could also be part of the contributing factor to why we're seeing this, is just these more mature oaks as well. Again, diagnosis is not too easy. It can look similar to many other issues. So definitely keep that in mind. And if you're not sure, ask someone to take a look at it for you. It's fairly similar symptoms to oak wilt. Oak wilt is kind of a top-down. Bur oak blight, or bob as they call it, is kind of a bottom-up. Again, you get rapid defoliation July and August, similar to oak wilt. And you'll also get, some patterns on the leaves and on the petiole as well. That may help you make that diagnosis. Here's a pretty good example of bur oak blight. If it pulls up there, maybe it won't. Maybe I'll go, there we go, one more click. You can see that really all that's left for this tree for this year is this green tuft on top. All these leaves are basically dead and really not contributing much. Sometimes the tree will try to put out another flush of leaves just because it's losing so much energy. But if it's still early enough in the season, they'll put out another flush. Obviously, that takes a lot of energy. Trees have energy for 5-6 years if they're healthy. So they can deal with this for a few years. But if it happens year after year, repeated infections, kind of like we're seeing now, it can start to make the tree vulnerable to other pathogens, other insects and diseases. Here's a good leaf sample of what you can see if you have a bur oak blight tree. We kind of getting this wedge at the top of the leaf, kind of follows that leaf margin. And then you'll also get to see some of these necrotic or black spots, especially further down on the petiole. You'll see these little pustules, and that's kind of that, that's where the spores are released from, essentially. And this is, on the underside of the leaf is where you'll see it. So that can help as a diagnostic tool. And again, you can also always bring samples into the plant health disease clinic if you're really curious as to what's going on there. And again, they like big samples. The bigger the branch, the more they can see, and they can see other things as well. Management options, I don't hesitate to say it's still kind of experimental at this point. There is a lot of research even at the University of Minnesota, and also with the company that I work for, Davy Tree. These slides are courtesy of Chelsea Abbott down there, who's been working on it pretty extensively. But we're kind of treating it like oak wilt. We're treating it with propiconazole, a fungicide, and we're giving it a pretty high dose, and we're trying to do it as early in the spring as possible before that infection cycle can start. And again, if, we're seeing inconsistently effective, I'll quote her right there. So some trees it seems to work on, others not. But nevertheless, I'm really worried about this. It could be, if we've had so many warm, wet springs, if we get a snap of that, if we get a cool, dry spring, it really could make a big difference as far as knocking that fungus back. So we'll see. The jury's still out, but definitely keep an eye on that one. And, again, it's not fatal, but if it happens 5 or 6 years in a row, it can turn that way. So, but those are kind of the treatment options. All right, I'm going to change gears completely. That's kind of the first part of the series. I do want to talk about pruning trees. And again, like I mentioned, if you get someone on your property and, to try to understand where they're coming from and to try to see what they're looking at when they look at your trees, I thought it might be fun, it might be helpful to look at kind of the terminology they use. Why do we prune trees? There's 5 good reasons right there. All of them are valid points. Prune to clean. I kind of also call that deadwooding, if you will. Maybe that's not the best term, but they'll call it crown cleaning. These terms are from the American National Standards Institute. A lot of industries have standards that they need to meet to be consistent with one another, and the tree care industry is no different. So they kind of have some terminology that they like to use. So if you've got multiple bids from different care companies, you can kind of compare them. Instead of one person saying deadwooding, the other crown clearing, you want to try to get that consistency in there if you can. But if they're just talking about a crown clearing, I think of that usually in a big mature oak tree, just getting all the deadwood out of there. They're pretty good at shedding branches. But if you clean it up, get a good crown clearing, you'll reduce that insect and fungal issues up there and make it a healthier tree. When they talk about crown thinning, they're talking more about just shaping the tree a little bit, trying to keep its structure as healthy and productive as possible for the remaining life of that tree. When they talk about crown raising, that usually refers to just getting some space so you could walk under there, so you can get a mower underneath there, or whatever the case may be. So that's kind of where they use that terminology. When we talk about crown reduction, I think of utility companies, pruning back from a utility line. If you've got a branch growing onto the shingles of your house or something like that, you tell the arborist you want a crown reduction, they'll be pretty impressed, I think, if you use that terminology on there. So that's kind of what that refers to, just getting it out of the way. When you do this, ideally you cut back to the trunk, but if you can't go back that far, you want to take it back to where the branch that you're removing, let's say, is 6 inches. You want to bring it back to the next lateral branch, and hopefully that lateral branch is going to be about at least 1/3 of the diameter of that branch that you took off. So hopefully this is at least a 2-inch branch off of that 6-inch branch that you cut. It's just better for the tree and better for the shape of the tree too. So keep that in mind. Structural pruning, definitely one of the most important ones that I think you can possibly do. It really sets up trees for success for the rest of their life, essentially. We kind of neglect the young, newly planted trees, and they are maybe the ones that can benefit the most. What you're trying to do when you do a structural prune is get rid of the crossing and the rubbing branches. You can remove some interior branches as well. You don't want to do too much of the interior branches because they do serve a purpose, but it may be good to get rid of some of those just to create a better structure and a better tree. Sometimes even, with the maple trees, if you get some codominance, trees, they want to be dominant. They want to put up one main lead, at least some species of trees, especially maples. But a lot of times, they come out of the nursery and they have 2 very codominant stems. You want to try to get rid of one of those at an early stage, just so you have one dominant lead. If you have 2 of them, then it's as it gets older, it's gonna possibly split or break, and so it's a good time to do that when they're young. It's hard to do when they're mature to take off, a big part of that tree. So if you plant new trees, get them pruned a few years after that, and it really will benefit the trees and yourself. Restoration pruning, that's more from a storm damage or a vandalism event or something like that, where you're just trying to restore the shape of the tree. Maybe it was somebody who was not a good arborist and did some damage to your tree, and now you need someone else to come in there and kind of fix what they did. But that's kind of what we call restoration pruning. And last but not least, we also have what we call rejuvenation pruning, which is more for smaller shrubs, or even medium-sized shrubs, like spirea, where you can cut it to ground level and it will come back and it will have that nice, perfect shape again for you next year. Or, if you have an older amber maple, multi-trunked, and it gets so leggy, you can actually do a pretty hard cut. Of course, it has to be the dormant season that you do this, because you don't want to whack off all the living tissue during the growing season. But if you cut it in the winter, within a few months, you'll have almost a brand new shrub. I mean, it really does work well. Some species definitely respond better to it than others, so keep that in mind. But rejuvenation pruning is something I think there could be a lot more of in the landscape as well. Oops. When to prune, as I mentioned, dormant season is definitely the best. It doesn't mean you can't during the spring or the summer, but preferably dormant is best. If you do have to do it during the growing season, try to limit it to dead or damaged branches at that time. And again, I can't encourage it enough. Do not prune oaks during the growing season. Again, that's April, May, and June essentially, but any time of the year, growing season, it's best not to prune oaks. Definitely winter work. So if you are going to prune your own tree, let's say you want to do some structural pruning, it's good to kind of understand some of this terminology here. This union between the trunk and the branch is really pretty incredible. It's like lattice work, overlapping over many, many years, and that's an extremely strong bond that they create there. You've probably all seen open-grown oaks where they have those really long lateral branches that, if you were an engineer, you'd say, well, we need a cantilever in there or something. They just defy physics, essentially. But that's kind of where that's a really strong bond there. And you want to be careful with this cut, because you've got this branch bark ridge, which is that little furrow right there, and then you've got the branch collar, which is kind of a bulge or a swelling out. Now, you don't want to cut it as close to the trunk as possible. You want to try to maintain that branch bark ridge and that branch collar, and you'll get a good wound, and it will heal over very well for that tree. So simple pruning techniques, but can really make a big difference for that tree. If you're pruning off a larger branch, a great way to do this is your first cut is just kind of an undercut on that branch. You're not doing much, but just kind of cutting a little bit into that. Then when you do this second cut from top down, a lot of times when you get to about here, you know, the weight of that branch will pull down and you'll get this big tear out. And if it's a thin bark tree like a maple, you know, you can get a big tear down. But what happens if you've made that first cut, the tear down will stop right there. And now you still have this little stub left, but that's okay. Now you can make your final cut right there. So great little pruning trick to avoid those tear outs. And again, if you're using like a little hand pruner like that, the ones that cross over each other are better than kind of like the anvil type pruners. They just make a little bit of a better cut there. So some few pruning techniques that we like to do. I've got my top 10 list of trees here. This is a great story with this one. A good mentor of mine, and maybe some of you will still recognize the name Mark Stennis, actually found, you know, this tree. I think it was in Afton. I know it was by the St. Croix River. We'll put it that way. And he was walking about at a client's property, and he noticed this monstrous elm tree, you know, 60 inches in diameter, a great big American elm, and all around it were trees that were dying from Dutch elm disease. You know, so why is this tree still here? It's been exposed year after year after year, and, you know, he determined it obviously has some resistance to the disease. So it has been pretty heavily propagated. It is commercially available right now. It is known as the St. Croix elm, and, you know, we all still remember the good old days of the American elm, just a great form, great height, you know, nice yellow fall color, really quick growing. And as we just learned in pruning, this one could definitely use some structural pruning. They grow very quick and very leggy, but if you take care of them the first few years, they're really gonna pay back dividends in the end. So if you plant one of these, you know, hybrid or disease type elms, definitely prune them early. Hackberry is a great tree, a native tree that's probably a little bit underutilized in our environment. It's a tough tree. It does well, definitely in a variety of soils. Good mature height. You know, think about when you plant it, you know, that it has enough space. It's also got that bumpy bark, which is kind of a neat physical appearance that it has. Swamp white oak's pretty, you know, getting more and more common in the environment, but also relatively native tree. You know, it's not, I'd say, moderate to good growth rate. It's maybe not the quickest growing of the oaks out there, but mature height is, you know, it will be ultimately a good tree. It's got a good dense form to it, and as a tough tree, does great in a lot of different environments. Honey locust, this is maybe one of my favorite trees to sit under. I just love the shade that it provides, kind of a dappled light, not too heavy shade, not too thin a shade, but just a great tree to sit under, in my opinion, and also a very tough tree. It does have the you know, the pods, but that's, some do, some don't. But every tree, you know, is a little messy, and that's just one of the characteristics of this one. You know, mature height, mature width are, you know, perfect environment for a nice landscape tree. Good fall color and good growth rate, and again, really a tough tree. All of these are going to be able to handle a pretty tough site. Good. This one's good for salt too, so even near the street. Ginkgo's, you know, obviously a prehistoric tree, kind of got that fan-shaped leaf. Minneapolis, you know, I see a lot of them in Minneapolis. You know, you want to be careful about, you want to get the non-root fruiting selection. Obviously, they do produce some fruit, and it can be a little messy in that respect. But still, a good tree, tough tree. They can get really big as well. good growth rate and good fall color as well. So ginkgos are definitely a good option as well. I like these Kentucky coffee trees. They don't look like much when they're young, but they as they mature, they don't have a lot of main branches on them. But when I see them on the boulevard, and they're mature, they just really look cool. They look very graceful, great characteristics, and if they're on the boulevard, they obviously can take quite a bit. Again, that nice fall coloring, a pretty good growth rate, and just kind of a unique tree all in all. It also has kind of the bean pods on it, if you will, but a little smaller size too. So, but good option there as well. Ohio Buckeye, again, is also a good tree. It's a little bit more of an understory tree, if you will. As you can see from the picture there, it does throw off a lot of shade, but I like the form. It's very rounded and pretty dense, and also is a good in wooded sites if you're trying to plant something in the understory. This may be an option for you. Kind of got those sweeping branches, kind of similar like the oak, and it's also one of the first ones to kind of leaf out in the spring. Ironwoods, also known, like all trees, they've got 3 or 4 names to them. This one's also known as hop hornbeam, and you do see quite a few of these out in the woods. They don't, it says growth rate good. If they're open grown like that, definitely. If you see them in the forest, they can be pretty small, but they're usually pretty old as well. But still definitely a viable option. You can kind of see the, they call it hop hornbeam for a reason. That kind of looks like some hops right there. Also, it's a tough wood, obviously, ironwood. It's really heavy and really dense wood, but a good tree for a good dry site. Here's the Ammermachy. It's also, I like the bark on this one. It's kind of a unique color, kind of a copper color to it. It's not a native tree from Asia, but there are a ton of varieties out there. But it's been pretty much part of the environment here, and a good option. It's not going to be a huge tree, so it fits into a spot very, very well. If you've got the right spot for it. So another good tree that's not too much utilized in the environment, and also kind of a good conversation piece with that bark. Last but not least, serviceberries. Great trees as well. A lot of varieties, again, of the serviceberry. They're also known as Juneberries, a lot of other names as well. But a great tree for the environment. This one's flowering, it looks like, very inconspicuous flower, so you don't notice much of that. It's got a beautiful fruit, but you never really see it because the birds will get it before you get to eat it. It's a good berry as well. Serviceberry pie, I think of, and other things as well. But another great tree that has a lot of applications, good fall color, and pretty good growth rate as well. So that's it for the presentation. I very much appreciate your attention and coming tonight. And certainly, if you have any questions, I'd be happy to entertain those at this point. And Kathy's got the microphone there, so I'll do my best.
Has the Chinese long-eared beetle come to Minnesota yet? I heard that that's going to be quite a problem.
Yeah, I think maybe Asian longhorn beetle is kind of what you're referring to. Luckily, we have not found it here. It has been as close as Chicago area. When I was out with the Department of Ag gentlemen, we think we can predict what's going to be next, but it's probably going to be something else. That would be a logical guess. It's got a lot of hosts. It loves a lot of different things, so it's very definitely something we need to be concerned about. They really are fighting it very aggressively, and they are making some inroads against it. So I'm hoping that's not going to be the case. But again, it's probably going to be something that we're not ready for and we're not really expecting, similar to emerald ash borer. when they first found that in the Detroit area. Nobody really knew what it was or where it came from. So, but good question, but has not been found in this area. Knock on wood, right?
I had a question. Now, these trees that are like the Kentucky coffee and the Buckeye, like those grow well in Iowa, and they're not native here. Do they do well here? I mean,
yeah, definitely. I've seen definitely a lot of Kentucky coffee trees and Buckeyes. They're definitely in our native environment here. A little more in this, we're a little bit on that northern cusp of that range, but I don't see a problem with pushing that envelope at all. I think, London plane trees or tulip trees or sycamore trees, I think, it wouldn't hurt to plant some of those now, maybe even help them move north a little bit. And also, if you find a nice micro environment, on the south side of your house, that's a little protected from the elements, that might help it go a little further too. So don't feel threatened by planting something that's right on the edge of our zone, definitely.
Okay. Also, on my street, there are 2 magnolia trees. Are those native or?
There is one that kind of is native to this area. I've seen a lot of them at the Arboretum. One that does fairly well here, and my apologies, the exact variety escapes me at the moment, but there's just a few that do kind of well in this area, but obviously much more of a southern tree.
Yeah, they have these gorgeous flowers in the spring.
Yeah, you'll find them out there.
I keep thinking they'll die, but they've been there for 25 years.
Yep, absolutely.
We have a lot of trees in our yard. We have 4 of them that we have planted within the last 20 years. 3 of them are oak. 1 is linden. The bark has split all the way up. The one that's 20 years old, the oak, it's huge. I mean, it's this far apart, but it keeps living. I mean, the trees, the leaves are beautiful.
Yeah.
What happened, and what can we do to preserve the tree?
So the linden, you said, has the
It
split?
also has but that one is probably only 10 years old.
Okay.
And it isn't as big. The split isn't as big.
Okay.
But the 3 oak trees, the split is very large.
Very large. Usually that's not going to be too much of a problem for the tree, to be honest. If it goes all the way down to the base of the tree, you can start to get some rots down there, and then that's obviously going to be a little bit of a problem. But if it's a tree that's been wounded by, frost crack or, sun scald or something like that.
2 of them are near water. Does that make a difference?
Probably not too much. I think it's probably independent of that. But if it's a wound, generally, even under that crack, they're going to try to callus over. They're going to try to, stop that decay from moving outward, inward, up and down on that tree. So they will callus it over as well as they can. I actually encourage people, if it's an oak and it's a big mature oak, you can actually, if it's got a crack, if there's loose bark, don't feel bad pulling that loose bark away and getting it back to where you see that nice callus tissue. If you leave that bark on there, it can be a good environment for more fungus and insects.
So we should take the bark off.
If it's easy to do, an X-Acto knife, or even if you pull it, as long as you don't make a new wound, essentially, and keep it on
the leaves are beautiful, and it comes out every spring.
Yeah, trees are tough. There's no doubt about it. I mean, we beat them up pretty good.
So we can save the tree.
Yeah, absolutely. If it's doing well, I would give it every benefit of the doubt.
Do you have recommendations for some coniferous trees that you like?
Yes, I think it kind of depends on what you're trying to accomplish. If it's maybe a screening, I mean, I'm starting to notice more issues with the spruce trees, unfortunately, and I don't know again if it's warmer weather. There are some new fungal issues with the spruce that we're noticing. Even the old reliable Black Hill spruce are starting to show some dying at the bottom and whatnot. So, those are still great trees, don't get me wrong. I think maybe a white fir or Abies concolor kind of unique tree. It's very feathery and kind of gray in color. You don't see a lot of them out there, but if it's a, it could be a focal point of the property. Very, very unique look to it. And I'm still, fairly good fan of fir trees, even, Douglas fir. I know it's not from around here, but it's a kind of unique looking tree. The Swiss stone pine, I think, is a fairly well landscaped tree around. And if you're looking for the natives, definitely the spruce are, probably your best bet. But did you have any specific purposes with it, or?
No, I saw the city selling the Austrian pine.
Okay.
Do you like that tree too?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's done well in this environment, fairly heavily planted. It's pretty similar to our red pine, but also, pretty tough tree. So I wouldn't hesitate to plant that.
Okay, thanks.
Absolutely.
We've lived in our property about 50 years, and about a third of the acres on the hill. And we've just let the natural forest be the natural forest, but when we do have arborists come out and trim it out, because of course we get dead trees and they fall over and this sort of thing. My curiosity is, when I've asked arborists, what are these trees that exist? And we've not really planted anything. We have lost some oaks out of there. Mm-hmm. They tell me it's a type of cherry. And that's always the answer. And I think, type of cherry, is this a huge category, or just some nuisance tree? Or I mean, we've just let the natural evolution happen, and I'm just not sure what they mean by this is a type of cherry. And I say, is this the same type? Well, what's one type? And no, this is another type. So could you explain that a little more clearly, or do you? Know what I mean?
If it's in the wooded area, kind of a native or just a kind of a natural area, more than likely it is our black cherry, and that is a great tree. They have a kind of you see them with the oaks a lot. They complement one another. They are they grow pretty tall and pretty straight. They don't often have a lot of leaves on them, so they're not always the prettiest looking trees, but they, from what I hear, are an extremely valuable wildlife tree, as far as the berries. Birds just love them, and definitely, do not remove them. Definitely keep them, even if, if it's not a landscaped area, they're doing a big benefit back there. So, definitely keep them around and try to, promote them as much as you can. Probably not going to need much as far as, tree care. I mean, they're going to be pretty tucked in there and just kind of a tuft on top. But again, a great tree that we see a lot of around here and need to continue to.
So you're calling it a black cherry?
Yep, that's what's most common around here. Definitely very, peeling bark. Mm-hmm. And that's, I'd be happy to come and take a look at it for you too, but that's more than likely what you're looking at.
And they're self-propagating?
Self-propagating, I'm not 100% sure. Each species is a little different. Off the top of my head, I'm not sure if it's a self-propagating or needs a mate.
Thank you.
Yep.
We have a property in Dinkytown, and about 10 years ago, the city offered trees for sale, and we purchased a Kentucky coffee tree. Well, for reasons that I will never know, it was snapped off because it's student area. Mm-hmm. And so it came up with about 7 trunks. Mm-hmm. So it began to look like a bush. Mm-hmm. And so I've kind of taken some of these out, but I can't do so much that I kill the tree. Yeah. So I think I'm about down to 3 or 4 trunks. And I keep limbing up. And should I just leave it at the 4 trunks, or should I still keep taking out trunks?
I would probably, I would probably feel comfortable taking all out except the one that's doing the best, to be perfectly honest with you. I mean, what's great is you have a really established root system there. So, even if you cut them all off, what's going to come out of there is going to be a rocket. I mean, it's going to grow very quickly. So, because that root system has been establishing, granted, you've been cutting it back some, But that's definitely going to help that tree. Most people would probably say, just replant. But if you want to continue to nourish that tree and continue to give it that care, I would probably take the others out. I think you've waited long enough, and I think you did a good job there. That's the right way to approach it. You don't want to take all at once, but I think you're at the point where you could probably take the remaining 3 and really encourage that one to take off.
Is there a downside to leaving? I don't know if it's 3 or 4. I haven't paid any attention. I probably can't see it in the snow, but is there a downside? It looks kind of cool, actually. It looks like a birch clump.
Yeah, I mean, it will, look cool for a while, but when it gets mature, then it might start to have some issues. If it's multi-stemmed and they're all going to be leaning, out, trying to get sun, competing against one another. So they're, preferably they're single stem trees, and that's the way they'd want to grow. So I would, it's obviously up to you, but if it were my tree, I'd probably just go with that one stem and really promote that one as much as I could.
Do you have an opinion on the pheromone traps for Japanese beetles?
Thanks for asking. I was going to mention that, actually. I think they're more of a novelty, to be honest with you. I think you kind of have a competition with your neighbor to see who can catch more. They're going to attract them. They catch them, but they're also going to attract them. And the more beetles that are around, the more other beetles are going to come in. So I would generally, just try to shy away from those. It's not really going to get you a huge benefit in the end. The grubs are the main thing there. So.
We've got a spruce tree that the top third of it sets new buds every year, but they're not growing. I can't see an obvious insect infestation, but I don't.
Okay.
Do you have any idea what does that to spruce trees?
The
whole thing isn't. It's not like a needle cast where it's losing the whole thing. It's really in that top. Right.
There are some insects that really like to key on that stem that wants to go straight up. They are well hidden. They can be inside the stem itself, kind of borers that are internally there. Do you notice any like shepherd's crooking? They call it. Kind of does it tip over or lean or anything like that?
Total
on the top?
lack of vigor. And of course, it loses its last year's needles and only has a really small flush. Anything at the tips. So
And how mature is the spruce? Pretty mature.
Probably a 30 plus foot tall tree.
Okay, so it'd be hard to get up there. I mean, if we're young, you may even want to consider just snipping that part off, because one of those laterals will take off and try to compensate. Again, they have this really strong, apical dominance. They want to just grow straight up. So if you cut that off, one of them is going to assume that lead. It's going to have a crook for a while, but eventually that crook will straighten out. This tree's a little bit mature, so it may not be the best idea. I mean, it's not the perfect solution, but it is one to maybe correct that problem if there's some insect related issues up there. But
for spruce trees, are there root drenches or injections that can control those kind of infestations?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the key is to diagnose. Try to figure out exactly what you got going on. It's not always so easy. Evergreens are pretty good at masking those things sometimes. But you would just, someone with a trained eye to hopefully see some visual clues to help you try to diagnose it. And then there may be some treatment options available after you've kind of got a proper diagnosis.
Thanks.
Absolutely.
So I had a property in southern Indiana, so with some mature tulip trees. So that kind of excites me that if we can plant those up here too. So I had a question on the beetle, the Japanese beetle life cycle. Mm-hmm. Does it help to remove turf grass if that's their, I guess, food source in that stage, and plant other species on the ground floor?
I mean, so you're just thinking some natural grasses,
sure,
or something else like
yes.
that? I'm not 100% sure about that. I would think turf grasses is definitely their preferred, because they're always moist. They're pretty pampered and stuff like that. To my knowledge, they're not really going to attack other grasses that much. I may be mistaken, so I have to be careful about that. But I think that would probably, be a good alternative. It may be a pretty drastic measure. We're hoping that at some point the Japanese beetle goes away. It used to be a problem in the East Coast. The soil start to develop other microbes that will start to attack these grubs. And so hopefully in another 15 or 20 years, it may not be much of an issue anymore. Maybe you can't wait that long, but so that's the good news, I guess, there. But, definitely that would certainly be a viable option. I know they definitely prefer turf over pretty much anything else.
If there are no more questions, then we will conclude the meeting. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you, Kathy.
Appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you. Oh, yay. Look at that. Cribbage board. Wood from the hood. Thank you very much. Oh, cutting board. Excuse me. I'll make it into a cribbage board. No, I'm kidding.